Among the most meaningful moments of any visit to Israel is a pilgrimage to Mount Herzl, Israel's national cemetery, particularly to the rows of graves from the War of Independence. I always take time to read the names, and with each, the details provided. Born in Poland, died at the Battle of Latrun, age 19. Born in Czechoslovakia, died in the Battle of Jerusalem, age 17. Born in Romania, died in Operation Danny, age 21. The message is clear. Israel's independence was purchased with blood. As we sat down to our Seder tables at home this week, we reduced our cups of joy by 10 drops for the plagues on Egypt. We acknowledged that in that case, our people's freedom was purchased with the blood of other peoples. The Haggadah depicts the angels rejoicing when Egyptians drown in the Red Sea. But God rebukes them. The Egyptians are God's children too. And so it was with Israel's War of Independence. The Jewish people's freedom was purchased not only with Israeli soldiers' blood, but also with the blood of Palestinians and other Arabs. That time, God was not the one who killed soldiers of Arab armies that attacked after Israel declared independence. God also did not kill Palestinian and Bedouin villagers caught in the crossfire, and in some cases, documented, massacred. Palestinians, including Arab citizens of Israel, understandably do not celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Independence Day. Instead, they observe that occasion as Nakba, the catastrophe. No, Palestinians did not have their own homeland prior to Israel's establishment. Moreover, Jordan and Egypt did not empower Palestinians to establish their own state, as envisioned by the United Nations 1947 partition plan on land remaining in Arab hands after the 1948 war. However, while many Arab peoples were gaining independence from colonial powers at the period of Israel's establishment and in the decades that followed, one price of Jewish freedom was and remains that Palestinians cannot have their own state on the whole of their ancestral lands. Israel's freedom, like that of our ancient forebears liberated from Egyptian bondage, came at a cost, not only to those fighting for independence, but to another people. Soon after liberation, ancient Israelites learned that they would have to work to maintain their freedom, and Israelis have increasingly come to know the same. Before the Exodus, God tells Moses, "When you have freed the people from Egypt, you will worship God." God does not provide detail at that juncture. Soon, though, the people learn. 50 days after liberation, the Israelites received Torah at Sinai, replete with laws and commandments that they must observe. No longer servants to Pharaoh and the Egyptians, the children of Israel are now obligated to serve God. And how do the people respond? They build a golden calf. In this week's Torah reading, God forgives the people, but not before Moses instructs the Levites to put some 3,000 of the idolatrous Israelites to the sword. And if that weren't enough, God sends a plague. The children of Israel are free to serve their God, but not free to do as they please. Israelis have never thought that they had finished fighting for their freedom. Most Israelis are obligated to serve in the Israel Defense Forces for 2 or 3 years after high school, then in the reserves for decades thereafter. Israelis have never been free of military threat, as we saw tragically this week with rockets launched by both Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon, and a terrorist rampage on the Tel Aviv promenade today, which I frequent each summer. Recently, Israelis have become acutely aware that they had neglected a different but equally critical aspect of their liberty. They had not nurtured the democracy on which the Jewish state was founded. Yet Israeli voter turnout is outstanding, outstripping our record in the United States tremendously. However, too many Israelis were untroubled by a serious flaw in their democracy. Jewish settlers in the West Bank, including those whose settlements are considered illegal even by the government, retain the right to vote. By contrast, their Palestinian neighbors in the West Bank are not Israeli citizens and cannot vote in elections that determine how their lives will be ruled. That harsh reality brings the accusation of apartheid from abroad, but Israelis were generally willing to live with the cognitive dissonance required to believe that they lived in a democracy while hundreds of thousands of Palestinians lacked voting rights. Now, though, ordinary Israelis living inside Israel proper find their own rights threatened by an extremist right-wing government that seeks to disempower the courts that protect citizens from government excesses. Some have begun to realize that when democracy is corroded in one place and the people do not protest, it can be destroyed in others. Israelis have taken to the streets by the hundreds of thousands, cumulatively millions, and plan to do so again tomorrow, the 14th consecutive Saturday night of mass demonstrations. Increasingly, those demonstrations include opposition to the West Bank occupation, or at least to the most severe forms of oppression there. Protesters seeking to preserve Israeli democracy must struggle for freedom, not only for residents of Israel proper, but for everybody living under Israeli rule. Americans are particularly vulnerable to the criticism that we take our freedom for granted. Yes, a prior generation sacrificed collectively, all of them across the spectrum, to protect freedom not only for Americans, but also for Europeans and Asians from the evils of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. More recently, though, our nation failed to defeat a persistent existential threat from a violent extremist form of Islam. Why? Perhaps because the American people were never asked to cut back on our fossil fuel consumption, simultaneously funding the other side of the war on terror and wreaking untold damage on our planet, all the while turfing military service largely to low-income Americans. Other threats to American freedom come from within. Yesterday, Representative Justin Jones and Justin Pearson were expelled from the Tennessee legislature because they dared to raise their voices in protest against gun violence, loudly. They did so while committing the apparent crime of being young black men. The vote to expel the white legislator who joined Representative Jones and Pearson in protest was a failure. She was not expelled. When asked why she had not been expelled, Representative Gloria Johnson said, "It might have to do with the color of my skin." Yesterday's move was only the latest in a string of actions by the Tennessee legislature to diminish the voting power of city dwellers and Tennesseans of color, mostly by moving as many as possible into districts dominated by white rural voters, just as the Arkansas General Assembly did by dividing Pulaski County's black communities into 3 separate congressional districts. Freedom always comes at a price. Just as we acknowledged the tragedy of Egyptians drowning in the sea at our seders, so must we work to redress harms done in our name, in Israel, and here at home in America. Freedom requires constant vigilance. Israelis are setting an example of the sacrifices in time and energy required to save a democracy from destructions. Americans take note. We may do so with faith. The children of Israel take the source of their freedom for granted, even worshiping a golden calf rather than the God who liberated them. When they repent, returning to nurturing their freedom, God turns to them, lovingly revealing that even a God who demands loyalty can be forgiving. Let us act to preserve our freedom in America, in Israel, and around the world. Then may God respond once again with love.